When I get the car back then, I was thinking to myself, well, 20 years down the line, probably parts of this car is going to get very cheap so that I can put in more modes, I can drive it to the track, I can drive like a madman, you know. Unfortunately, things turned out the other way around. Hi everyone, my name is Yoong, and this is my R33 GTR, nicknamed Barney. Barney, the name actually comes from a magazine feature last time. The car was featured in Hypertune many years ago, and the title there was written Barney's Evil Twin. So from there I pick up the inspiration of naming the car Barney instead of its evil twin. I think I have started develop passion for cars since I'm young, I think about 3 years old. Yeah, so my dad got me a toy car that you can push with legs. Okay, so I like to go around the house in the thing, you know, slide the thing around. I think that is where I started to develop passion for cars. When I'm coming to age, I think I like to sit in my dad's car and mock driving the car. Yeah, like to mock driving, hold the steering, put the gears into position, and then pretend that I'm driving the car, but I never start the car. My first car is a Jeep Cherokee, 4-wheel drive, 2.5 liter. So I got the car and then I started to go into off-roading for a few years, molded the car into an off-road spec. Then finally I decided to give up on off-roading, so I put the RB into the car. So that is when my life started to get in touch with Nissan. My father is sort of like a handyman. He fixes everything around the house, but he's not that into cars. So I think I picked up the handiness from him. Yeah. But for me, my side is I like to work on car, but I'm actually IT based. I have zero knowledge on how to fix a car back then, and I always sleep during my physics class in school. So I don't have an interest for these things back then, but once I start to go into motorsport and all this automotive car culture thing, start to work on it, then I pick up the knowledge bit by bit, do a lot of reading. I did a lot of reading, especially from magazines about turbo, about engines and everything, books about them, information about them. So from there, I start to pick it up bit by bit. The knowledge that I acquire is actually progressive. Meddling and fiddling with cars give me the most satisfaction because I like to work on the car myself. It's not that I don't trust the mechanics out there. When you work on the car, you tend to build a deeper connection with the car, and then you see the outcome of your work, you get the satisfaction out of it. Once I have the RB in the Jeep Cherokee, I've always wanted a Nissan Skyline because I know that's where the engine comes from. But back in those days, it's very rare, and I've never seen one on the road before. So I've always wanted one. I think I used to come across a few of them in the books, you know, in the magazines, in games like Gran Turismo. But I have never seen one on the road back then because it's really rare. So I faintly remember my first encounter with a Skyline is actually a R34 GTT, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, it was somewhere at a accessory shop in Batu Cave. I was shopping for parts for my Jeep Cherokee actually. So I saw a 34 Skyline. I was like, wow, that's a nice car, you know. So from there on, I know it's possible to own one in Malaysia actually. I bought the car back in 2001. Yeah. So back at that time, Scars are really rare, so it's hard to find them. I remember looking at a few options. There was one stock R33 GTR. I wanted to buy the car, but when I wanted to pay deposit, the car is already sold. Someone bought the car by cash. So I was like, okay, never mind, then let's look for another one. So came across the R34 GTR. That time it was like 300,000, which is way over budget. So I also did look at the R32 back then in NASA. It was in quite sad condition and a lot of restoration works needs to be done in the car if I were to buy it, and it was like going for 160,000. That was also out of my option. So I came across this car. The previous owner traded it in the time and bought an Alteza. So I was like, okay, I look at the car. It has quite a little bit of stuff in there last time, but the engine was basically stocked. It has some gadgets of Apex-C last time. So basically, I think it's okay. So I didn't even test drive the car, just pay deposit and buy it. The first day that I got the car, the first thing I do is I wash it thoroughly. I like to wash my own car. I never send my car to car wash shop. So first thing I do is to clean the whole car down, using my own shampoo of choice. And then I drive it around quite frequently back then because that was my only car last time. Yeah, my daily driver. So I drive it to shopping malls, drive it to mama. I drive it to work. That was like my daily driver back then. I used to travel down to Singapore in the car. I like to go car parts shopping. My favorite place was Garage R. Some of you might know that my first engine rebuild is actually done by Garage R. The car runs HKS stuff, which was tuned by Garage R as well. The lows would be that I had a break-in the car back in 2004 when I was living at my old place. So I don't lock the car at night. So the thieves came in, they stole the F-Con V Pro, they stole the meters and all. They cut my harness. Estimated loss at the time is, I think, about 10,000 ringgit. Yeah, which is luckily not a lot compared to what I've spent on the car. Yeah, that's what motivates me to build a home garage at home so that I can lock the cars in and then I have peace of mind. I've driven all three of the GTR generations. Believe it or not, the 33 handles pretty similar to the 34. Instead of, they say that the car doesn't handle as good as the R32. The 33 has a very similar suspension setup compared to the 34 to the 32, because the 32 has a different front A-arm, has a different rear subframe. So the car actually has a lot of anti-squat, the 32, whereas the 33 and 34 they have a rear subframe with more squat. Both cars actually handles pretty similar. So why the hate on the 33? I think probably mostly because of culture. As you know, the car wasn't being liked in Initial D. Also, Keiichi Tsuchiya doesn't seem to like the car very much. So I don't think it's justified, because given the car has done like 7 minutes plus on the Nürburgring, it's like the first Japanese car that broke into the 8s. The car actually handles pretty well as to what people say, like it's a boat and all. I just think that people doesn't really know how to bring out the potential in the car. They just build the car for straight line speed. For me, I like to drive the car every way. You all know that I'll do high speed runs. I'll even drift the car. I think the car is very capable to responding to my input. That's also probably because why I've been spending so much time with the car. Okay, I mean 21 years on the car, I learned everything about it. Yeah, so I think the boat thing, that people call it, it's actually incorrect. The engine is basically blueprinted back then. It had a job done to the block. So the block was shot pinned, so all the internals are being shot pinned. Actually, the crank and the conrod are still stock. I have forged pistons. Basically, the conrods and the crank, they've just been work done on them. They're not a stroker kit. So turbos and cams are all spec'd to road driving. So contrary to what people done to the car, normally they will go for a big single turbo. I prefer a twin. setup because I like the boost threshold of the twin, whereby you can actually get boost with very light throttle, so that is absolutely suited for road driving. Actually, the suspension is still pretty stock. It has not much work done to them. The arms are all pretty much stock with just upgraded bushings. That's all. Okay. The shocks are actually very old Tiens. The coilovers has been in the car for like 21 years. I just service them frequently, like a few years once. So the ride of the car on the road is still very comfortable. I can bring the car to jalan-jalan, makan-makan. I can drive it to the track, no problem. Although, well, you'll get a reasonable amount of body roll because the car is not really light. Okay. I drive it up and down Genting always. Drive it up Uluyam always. Yeah, so basically I like how the suspension behaves as it is now, so I'm not planning to do any more work to the suspension. As for the exterior and the interior, a lot of Skyline owners, GTR owners, they would like to go for Nismo stuff because Nismo represents Nissan. Alright, so they are like the top aftermarket parts. But for me, I like to style it to my own taste. So instead of going for Nismo rims, Nismo body kits and all, as you can see, my car has a top secret body kit, which I got back in 2004. How do I get to know top secret? Is that Smokey Nagata. I get to admire his styling for cars. Basically, it's very Japanese style, I would say. And wheels, well, I always like the TE37. So yeah, when people always ask me, why don't you go for the LMGT4s? You know, not to say that the rims are not nice, but everybody wears them, so it's a little bit kind of boring. So yeah, I always love the TE37, and it matches well with the profile of the car. That's why I go for it. Actually, the parts for Skyline GTR, they're quite cheap back then. Believe it or not, I got 34 GTR seats in the car with, I think, 3,000 ringgit a pair. Back then, I got the Nismo meter, which I got for 1,000 ringgit plus, which is also impossible nowadays. So luckily, all the parts that I installed in the car was before the price hike. There are a lot of unique parts in the car, like my C's driving position shifter, where a lot of people thought it's sequential. It's a very rare and discontinued parts by a Japanese parts maker, which a lot of them closed down nowadays. Yeah, so these parts are very hard to get. A lot of my inspiration actually comes from top secret built cars. Yeah, which is why my 33 is basically styled like that. I also like to pick up some little things people do to the car. In magazines, it's like, wow, this little nice small piece of carbon that you add to the car looks very good, you know. Yeah, I'll try to duplicate it, try to make it. Yeah, so I like to pick up inspirations from magazines, from the internet, small little things people do to their car to make it unique. When I get the car back then at 2001, I was thinking to myself, well, 20 years down the line, probably parts of this car is going to get very cheap, so that I can put in more modes, I can drive it to the track, I can drive like a madman, you know, without having to worrying about replacement parts. But unfortunately, things turned out the other way around. But due to the price of the replacement parts are also going up, you know, like if there's a fuel pump in the car that goes cuckoo, you need to spend like 10,000 ringgit for a Nismo fuel pump now, which is absolutely mad. Yeah. It's definitely overhyped because these cars are out of production and it's getting rarer. So most people that bought them, they wanted it as a collectible nowadays instead of driving it the way it should be. I think it's quite unreasonable because these cars are meant to be driven. They are not meant to be put in a showroom or, you know, just go to car shows and park there. These cars are meant to be driven. These are sports cars. So I think the price hike has affected the way that people drive the car because it's too expensive. So you can't afford to have anything happen to the car, which I think it's really out of justification. Yeah, it shouldn't happen that way. If I haven't bought this car back then and I haven't put in the amount of modes in the car, I think today I'll be driving a 911 Turbo S, maybe. My family actually runs a stationery wholesale business, so that is my full-time job. I also did some driving instructor job, currently with Riven Communications under Paul Tan. Back then, I have worked for a few companies that does defensive driving training. I do that as a part-time job back then as well. I've raced professionally mainly in drifting. I've participated in D1 Malaysia. I've participated in Formula Drift Asia. I did a few MSF lately. I have never tried a drag competition officially, but I would like to try one. Yeah. I picked up drifting from a few friends, like Terrence and Ziking back then. From there, we started drift.com.my, which is a forum-based website, and we start to gather more people that are interested in the sport. So that's where we pick up the whole scene back then. Well, our long-term goal last time was definitely to bring up the drift scene, and I think we are quite successful back in those days because the scene ended up with D1 GP and Formula Drift coming in. That was our long-term goal, to gather more people and to bring in international competitions. I've joined competition since 2004, back then in the Proton Street Shootout series. And then later that, I did also organize a few drift events with my friends and all under drift.com.my. It's called the Defying Grip Challenge. And then after that, we moved on to a lot of other drift series like the Star Drift series, which is quite famous in A Famosa, and the Ace Drift series. I've raced and I've judged in some of those competitions. I think until 2014, which I stopped temporarily, call it a hiatus, until today, yeah. I have a R33 Skyline as my main drift car nowadays. Previously, my S13 was also my Formula Asia drift car, but now I've converted it to do more track driving, so the car has been set up differently. So now mainly I run the R32 Skyline for drift events. It has a V8 and I have nitrous in it, so it's pushing about 300 plus on the wheel, but the torque is mad. I can light up 285 tires easily on third gear with the nitrous. Why I go with the V8? It's because I think drifting requires a lot of torque. So if you drive a very laggy turbo car, you need to work a lot on the clutch. And you need a very good engine hardware, you need very good feel to really get the response of the turbo engine up. Driving an NA V8, it's very different, yeah, because the torque is on demand. So for me, it's very useful in a tandem situation where you need to get close to your opponent instantly. Yes, the turbo might have more speed, but for the V8, it has more control. That's what I liked about the engine. I like to have more control of the car, where I position the car, when I want it to accelerate, when I want it to decelerate. So I have more control in the car over the V8. Both cars handles very differently, I would say. For drifting now, I prefer the 32, but the S13 can be driven a lot faster compared to the 32 because the setup is really different. The 32 has a drift knuckle in front, yeah, 0 Ackerman, but the S13 still runs a stock knuckle. So in terms of drifting, the S13, it's not really that ideal. But if you go for time attack, if you go for track, if you go for winding roads driving, I would prefer the S13. Back then, I've done a few movies with my friends. Movies like Evolution KL Drift 1 and 2, I was heavily involved in. I drove the villain's RX-7 in both of the movies. So apart from movie productions, I also did a few commercials for car manufacturers. The most recent one was Toyota, Vios, if I remember correctly. For me, I like all kinds of driving. I am quite different from most people where they only prefer one type of motorsports. For me, I like to drive on the road, I like to drive on the track, I like to drift, I love rally as well. I like drags as well, I love autocrossing, I love gymkhana. Even you give me a stock car, I would drive it fast. When people ask me, what do you like, what do you do? I just tell them, you give me something with the steering and four wheels, I'll do something with it. Of course, Sepang has never banned me, but I do always get a black flag for drifting in Sepang back in those days. I think the social media has also affected how the car scene is progressing, because back in those days when we have forum-based websites, discussions are very much related to technical things. As of what you see today in social media mostly are just about sharing their rights and all. So it's not so much to technical stuff anymore, which I think has diverted the car scene from a more driving-oriented, technical-oriented car scene to a more aesthetic car scene nowadays. So I think, yes, we'll definitely benefit from a forum-based website. It's kind of sad, but that's the way it is. I've driven the car, yes, I would own it again any day. But if it's a little bit more expensive, I think I will go for a Porsche. As of now, the market price of the car that is hovering around 500,000, I don't think I will sell it. You could get a good Porsche, but you couldn't get the same thing in this. Yeah, the sentimental value is irreplaceable. I'm Yoong, and that is my story.